"You don't belong here." How would you feel if this was said to you? The words echoed through the stillness of the quiet suburban morning, cutting through the calm like a sudden storm. For Tariq James, it was supposed to be a routine drive, a simple visit to check on his property, a place he had worked tirelessly to own. But as those sharp words rang out, they carried more than hostility. They carried years of unspoken bias, years of assumptions, and the weight of a prejudice that had quietly shaped this neighborhood's identity. It wasn't just a confrontation between two people. It was the collision of two worlds. On one side, a man who had built his success brick by brick, fighting against obstacles to create a life of stability and pride for his family. On the other, a woman who had spent decades clinging to an idea of community that excluded anyone she felt didn't belong. What began as an ordinary moment would soon unravel into something far more significant, exposing the cracks in the community's carefully maintained facade and forcing everyone who heard the story to confront the uncomfortable truths it revealed. By the end of it, one person would be left stunned, their authority shattered. Another would stand tall, unshaken, a symbol of resilience and dignity, and the entire neighborhood would be left questioning the assumptions that had quietly governed their lives for far too long. What began as an ordinary morning was about to become anything but. For Tariq, this wasn't just about being stopped on his way to his property. It was about being seen as someone who didn't belong, someone who needed to be questioned. What unfolded in the moments that followed would expose not just one person's assumptions, but a much deeper truth about the biases that linger in places meant to feel like home. And by the end, it would leave one neighbor speechless and an entire community reflecting on what they thought they knew. Before we continue, what would you have done in Tariq's situation? Let us know what your response will be in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. Click on the like button. If you are new to the channel, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story that matters. Tariq had always dreamed of building a better life, not just for himself, but for his family. As a devoted husband and father of two young children, he understood the value of hard work and resilience. Growing up in a modest household, Tariq had watched his parents struggle to make ends meet, often working multiple jobs to ensure their family had food on the table and a roof over their heads. Those early lessons in perseverance shaped him, instilling in him a determination to rise above his circumstances and create a future where his children wouldn't face the same struggles he had known. Through grit and relentless effort, Tariq built a successful career as an entrepreneur, focusing on real estate development. Over the years, he had acquired several properties, but his most prized possession was a 3-story apartment building located in a quiet, predominantly white suburban neighborhood. For Tariq, this building represented more than just financial security. It was a beacon of hope and a testament to his ability to break through barriers in a society that often tried to hold him back. This wasn't just an investment property. Tariq had plans to move his family into the building during the upcoming holiday season, a step that would bring him closer to the community he had invested in. He imagined his 2 children running around the well-maintained grounds, his wife enjoying the peace and quiet of the suburban environment, and their family creating memories in a place they could truly call home. But Tariq was no stranger to the subtle resistance that came with being a black man in spaces that others didn't believe he belonged. On that crisp morning, Tariq was focused on his plans for the day. His truck, loaded with tools and supplies for a routine maintenance check, rumbled steadily through the quiet streets of the neighborhood. The sound of sprinklers ticking and birds chirping provided a calm backdrop, blending with the hum of the engine as Tariq made his way toward the apartment building he owned. To him, this was just another day, another opportunity to ensure his property was well maintained and his tenants were satisfied. Inside one of the houses lining the street, Helen Stevenson sat by her window with a cup of coffee in hand. The morning had been uneventful so far, just the way she liked it. She enjoyed her routine of scanning the neighborhood from her living room window, keeping a watchful eye on anything she deemed out of place. For years, Helen had considered herself the unofficial gatekeeper of the community, a role she took seriously. She believed it was her duty to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood, a responsibility she interpreted as ensuring that everything and everyone fit her narrow idea of what belonged. As she gazed out the window, Helen spotted an unfamiliar truck driving slowly down the street. Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, placing her coffee cup on the windowsill. The truck wasn't one she recognized, and its driver, a black man, immediately caught her attention. To Helen, his presence was an anomaly, something that required investigation. Without hesitation, she sprang into action. Leaving her coffee behind, Helen grabbed her cardigan and hurried to the front door. She stepped outside, her pace quickening as she made her way toward the street. By the time the truck was neared, she had positioned herself in the middle of the road, her posture rigid and her expression firm. She raised her hand, signaling for the truck to stop. Tariq noticed her sudden appearance in the street and frowned, slowing his vehicle. He was confused but not alarmed. He assumed she might need assistance or perhaps had a question about the building. As he brought the truck to a halt, he rolled down the window, his expression calm but curious. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her tone leaving no room for pleasantries. Tariq blinked, taken aback by the hostility in her voice. "I'm heading to my building," he replied calmly, gesturing toward the apartment complex just a few yards away. Helen's expression didn't soften. Instead, she stepped closer, folding her arms across her chest. "You don't belong here," she said firmly. "This is a private neighborhood, and I've never seen you here before." Tariq inhaled deeply, steadying himself. He had heard these words before, though often unspoken, lurking in the suspicious glances and hesitant greetings he encountered in spaces like this. "This is my building," he said, motioning toward the property again. "I own it." Helen scoffed, her disbelief apparent. "You own that building?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "There's no way you could afford that. Your people don't belong in this neighborhood." The words hit Tariq like a slap, but he refused to let his emotions show. He stepped out of the truck, his calm demeanor intact, and approached Helen. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his keys and held them up. "Now let's hear from you. What are your thoughts on this situation? How would you have handled it if you were in Tariq's position?" Share your views in the comments below. We'd love to know where you're watching from and your perspective on this story. If you're finding this story thought-provoking, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us bring more stories like this to you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss an important story that sparks reflection and change. "These are the keys to that building," he said, his voice steady and unwavering. "I've owned it for 3 years. I'm here to check on my property and make sure everything is in order." Helen stared at the keys, her expression a mix of disbelief and defiance. She didn't step back, her lips tightening as though she were grappling with a truth she didn't want to accept. "I don't believe you," she said after a moment. "People like you don't belong here. You don't fit." Tariq met her gaze, his voice calm but resolute. "Whether you believe me or not doesn't change the truth," he said. "This is my building, and I'm here to check on my property." For Tariq, this moment wasn't just about standing up to Helen. It was about claiming his space and asserting his right to belong. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a reminder that no amount of bias or prejudice could take away what he had worked so hard to achieve. The encounter between Tariq and Helen didn't end at the edge of the road. It rippled through the quiet suburban neighborhood, touching every corner and sparking conversations that had long been avoided. What started as a confrontation between two individuals became a catalyst for a broader examination of the community's values, its hidden biases, and the unspoken dynamics that had governed it for decades. As the story spread, neighbors began to take sides. Some rushed to Helen's defense, claiming she was simply looking out for the neighborhood. They painted her actions as a misguided but ultimately harmless attempt to maintain the community's safety and order. "She's just protective," one neighbor said during a gathering. "She's always been the kind of person to keep an eye on things around here." Others, however, weren't so forgiving. They were outraged by Helen's behavior, calling it blatant discrimination and an embarrassment to the neighborhood's reputation. "What she did was unacceptable," another neighbor argued. "This is not who we should be as a community. Tariq deserves better than this." The divide was evident. On one hand, there were those who excused Helen's actions, unwilling to confront the uncomfortable truth about her motivations. On the other hand, there were voices of accountability, urging the community to acknowledge the prejudice that had quietly taken root among them. The incident was more than just an unpleasant confrontation. It was a stark reminder of the challenges he continued to face as a black man in spaces that people like Helen believed weren't meant for him. He had spent years working to create a life of stability and success for his family, yet his presence in the neighborhood was still questioned, his ownership doubted, and his belonging challenged. However, this wasn't just a moment of frustration for Tariq. It was also one of clarity. He realized that his mere presence in the neighborhood, his achievements, and his composure were acts of resistance against a long history of exclusion. By standing firm in his truth, Tariq had not only asserted his place in the community, but also forced others to confront their biases. "This is my building," he had said, and those words echoed beyond his conversation with Helen. They became a declaration of his right to exist, to own, and to thrive in spaces where people like him had so often been excluded. Tariq's response wasn't about proving himself to Helen or anyone else. It was about maintaining his dignity and refusing to let ignorance dictate his narrative. For Helen, the encounter was deeply unsettling. For decades, she had operated as the self-appointed gatekeeper of the neighborhood, watching over it with a sense of authority that had rarely been challenged. Her actions had gone unchecked for years, and many of her neighbors had quietly tolerated her intrusive behavior. But this time was different. Tariq's calm and resolute response exposed the flaws in Helen's perception of her role in the community. Her authority, once unquestioned, was now under scrutiny. The neighbors who had once nodded politely at her comments or ignored her actions began to reevaluate their complicity. Some distanced themselves from her altogether, unwilling to be associated with someone whose behavior had caused such an uproar. Others, though still hesitant to confront her directly, stopped engaging with her as openly as they once had. For the first time, Helen found herself isolated, her influence waning as her actions became a source of shame rather than pride. The incident forced Helen to confront a hard truth. Her assumptions about who belonged in the neighborhood weren't just outdated, they were harmful. It was no longer about protecting the community, but about protecting her own narrow view of what the community should be, and now that view was crumbling. The ripple effect didn't stop with Helen or Tariq. It extended to the entire neighborhood, forcing residents to take a closer look at themselves and the dynamics that had quietly governed their interactions for years. Some neighbors admitted, often reluctantly, that they had harbored similar assumptions about Tariq when they first saw him. "I hate to say it," one resident confessed during a community meeting, "but I didn't think he owned that building either, and that's on me. I need to do better." Others used the incident as an opportunity to educate themselves and their families. Parents talked to their children about the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of appearances. Neighbors who had never spoken to Tariq before reached out to apologize or to offer their support. But there were also those who remained resistant to change, clinging to the idea that Helen's actions had been justified. They avoided the conversations altogether, retreating into their homes and pretending the incident had never happened. Despite this resistance, the ripple effect was undeniable. Tariq's confrontation with Helen had planted a seed of awareness in the community, sparking a dialogue that had been needed for years. It challenged long-held assumptions, encouraged reflection, and for many, marked the beginning of a slow but meaningful shift in attitudes. Tariq had no interest in holding grudges or demanding apologies. Instead, he focused on his family, his tenants, and the life he was building. But his presence in the neighborhood, his resilience and his dignity served as a quiet reminder of the strength it takes to stand firm in the face of prejudice. The experience lingered. Helen began to withdraw from the social gatherings she once dominated, her confidence shaken by the community's response. Whether she truly reflected on her actions or simply retreated to avoid further scrutiny remained unclear. But her days as the neighborhood's gatekeeper were over, and the power she once held had slipped through her fingers. The neighborhood itself was forever changed. The incident exposed the cracks in its facade of harmony, forcing its residents to confront the uncomfortable truths that had long been ignored. And while not everyone embraced the opportunity for growth, many did, taking small but meaningful steps toward creating a community where dignity and respect were not the exception, but the standard. This story isn't just about Tariq and Helen. It's a reflection of how deeply bias can be embedded within our communities, shaping interactions in ways that often go unnoticed. Prejudice doesn't always manifest in loud or obvious actions. It's in the subtle glances of suspicion, the unspoken assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't, or the quiet resistance to change that hides behind the guise of preserving a community's character. These small moments, though seemingly inconsequential, carry the weight of generations of ingrained stereotypes and systemic inequality. When Helen blocked Tariq's truck, it wasn't just an act of individual prejudice, it was an echo of the countless barriers people face every day, rooted in a mindset that categorizes others based on appearance rather than merit or truth. These biases don't always announce themselves with hostility. They live in the reflexive judgments, the questioning of someone's place, and the invisible walls that are built to separate us from them. Belonging, however, is not something that can be dictated by others. It is not dependent on the approval or acceptance of those who attempt to gatekeeper spaces. True belonging comes from the courage to stand firm in one's identity, to exist unapologetically, despite the barriers placed in your path. Tariq's story reminds us that the power of belonging lies in claiming it for ourselves, in asserting our right to exist in spaces we've earned, and to challenge the narratives that attempt to exclude us. This moment between Tariq and Helen serves as a broader reminder. The way forward isn't through exclusion, but through reflection, understanding, and a willingness to dismantle the biases that shape our communities, because only when we begin to confront these quiet prejudices can we create spaces where belonging is not questioned but celebrated, a world where everyone's place is recognized and valued. If you've ever witnessed or experienced a moment like this, share your experience in the comments. If this story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to see more stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us continue to bring you stories that inspire reflection and spark change.